He thought he was just patching a frost-cracked workshop floor, but when the concrete groaned and slid open to reveal a steel hatch and a spiral staircase sinking into the frozen earth, Ethan Cole realized winter had been hiding something far more dangerous than the cold. With his aging German Shepherd Ranger stepping fearlessly into the darkness, first, Ethan followed his flashlight cutting through the underground void until it landed on the unthinkable, not a bunker, but the hulking silhouette of a perfectly preserved WWII Sherman tank. And then another, and another. A broke, battle-scarred veteran had just stumbled into a secret armored vault worth nearly $100 million, and the ghost who built it left behind one final impossible command. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. Winter pressed against the Montana mountains like a silent, relentless giant laying sheets of white across the abandoned town of Hollow Ridge. The wind carried a frozen bite sharp enough to sting through wool and leather, and the sky hung low and heavy, bruised with dusk, despite the early hour. Ethan Cole guided his old blue pickup along the cracked road toward his new property, a battered workshop left to die on the outskirts of a town that had mostly forgotten how to breathe. Ethan, 42 years old, wore the look of a man shaped by years he never chose. He had a hard, angular jaw, softened only by days of stubble, deep-set gray eyes that held the weight of memories he never said aloud, and a thick scar cutting just above his left eyebrow, a reminder of a roadside blast overseas that had taken 2 friends and left him with the ghosts he carried now. His posture hunched slightly, as if bracing against impacts long past but never forgotten. He spoke, little laughed, almost never, and preferred silence as his only companion besides the dog who sat beside him. That dog was Ranger, a 10-year-old German Shepherd with a powerful frame and storm-colored fur that had turned silver along the muzzle. His ears were still sharp, his amber eyes intelligent and soft, yet always vigilant. Ranger had been Ethan's partner since the deployment that fractured Ethan's life, and the dog still watched him the way soldiers watch their own, ready to steady him when the invisible weight grew too heavy. Hollow Ridge greeted them without warmth. It was a ghost town, windows-boarded storefronts skeletal and snow piling against forgotten doorframes. Ethan didn't mind. Solitude was the only thing he craved now, and this place promised it in abundance. The workshop appeared at the end of a gravel path, choked with ice. It was a metal-sheathed structure slumped under years of wind damage, with rust gnawing at its sides and a sagging roofline like a wounded animal too stubborn to die. Ethan parked, took one long breath of the frozen air, and stepped out. He felt the strange mixture of relief and dread that always came with new beginnings. "Home," he muttered, though the word felt foreign in his mouth. Ranger jumped down landing with the slight stiffness age had begun to impose on him, and immediately swept the perimeter with methodical seriousness. Ethan unlocked the door to the office attached to the workshop. The interior smelled of old pine boards, dust, and something else, something metallic that made his senses sharpen. The walls were bare except for a broken clock frozen at an unknown time and a single workbench littered with ancient screws and bolts. The main workshop beyond the office was cavernous, cold, and dim. Ethan flicked a switch. A lone bulb crackled to life overhead, barely casting enough light to push back the gloom. Despite the decay, the isolation soothed him. No demands, no voices, no memories he had to explain. Just cold air and quiet metal. For the first time in months, his breath came easier. As night settled, wind clawed through every gap in the structure, making the old metal creak like bones shifting under weight. Ethan rolled out his sleeping bag on the office's narrow cot, keeping his jacket on for warmth. Ranger curled beside him close enough to share heat, but alert enough to respond to any disturbance. Ethan wasn't asleep long before Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The dog's ears pricked forward, body tense, eyes fixed toward the far corner of the main workshop. Ethan felt the shift immediately. The dog's intuition was rarely wrong. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice roughened by fatigue. Ranger stood padded into the workshop and stiffened near an old bricked-up section of wall that looked like an abandoned fireplace. The bricks were ugly, uneven, sloppily mortared, odd, considering everything else had decayed naturally. Ranger pressed his nose against a hairline crack at the base. A faint breath of icy air slipped through wrong in both temperature and smell. Ethan walked over, crouched, and placed his palm above the crack. The cold was too sharp, too direct, as if not from the building but from somewhere hollow beneath. Then he smelled it, a deep, oily, metallic scent, machine oil, old and heavy, not something found in a carpenter's workshop. Something impossible. Ranger looked at him with an expression he recognized too well. Alert, insistent, warning him that danger or discovery waited. Ethan lowered his ear to the floor, feeling foolish, but guided by instinct. For a second, there was nothing, only the winds moaning outside. Then a sound rose faintly from the depths below, a solid, heavy clunk like steel shifting under pressure. Ethan jerked upright, breath-held heart pounding. Ranger didn't move, didn't blink. His entire posture screamed certainty. Something was down there, something metal, something alive only in memory, yet echoing upward through the floor. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling that old familiar tightening in his chest, the one that whispered trouble always found him, no matter how far he ran. "Not tonight," he muttered. But deep inside he already knew the truth. This winter, Hollow Ridge was not as empty as it seemed. Snow hammered the workshop roof like a ceaseless drum as Ethan Cole stood over the cracked floor with a pry bar in one hand and a racing pulse in his chest. The cold seemed sharper today, as if the mountain air itself sensed what he was about to uncover. Ranger hovered nearby, tail stiff, and ears perfectly forward, his amber eyes glowing with that uncanny instinct. Only old working dogs carried an instinct that made Ethan trust him more than he trusted himself. He knelt again beside the hairline crack and steadied his breathing. Last night's sound, the heavy metallic thud echoing from beneath, had lodged in his mind like a splinter. He told himself he wasn't afraid, but fear was exactly what sat behind his ribs, tight and familiar. Fear of unknown spaces, of buried threats, of memories waiting for a chance to climb out of the dark. Ranger nudged his elbow. "I know," Ethan murmured. "We're doing this." With a hard swing, he struck the concrete. The brittle surface shattered, dust spiraling upward in a cold breath. Beneath the top layer, he found a reinforced metal plate fused with decades of grit. Another strike. Then another. After nearly an hour of pounding, scraping, and dragging tools across the grinding surface, Ethan exposed something unnatural, a circular valve bright red beneath grime. Its paint chipped but still vivid. A pressure wheel. Cold War engineering. Heavy, industrial, hidden. "What the hell were you keeping down there?" Hartman Ethan whispered, as if the dead owner could hear. Major Dominic Hartman. Ethan remembered the man from local whispers, a recluse long gone before Ethan had ever arrived. People described him as tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair kept military short until the day he died, and a pair of sharp blue eyes that rarely blinked. Gruff. Private. A man who avoided the town except when absolutely necessary. Someone said he used to talk to himself while walking his property, muttering about idiots destroying history and steal souls. Others said he carried grief from losing his entire tank crew in a firestorm during the war. Whatever he was, he clearly never let go of the past. Ethan gripped the valve and twisted. It refused to move, frozen with age. He repositioned his feet, braced himself, and heaved with everything years of military service had taught his muscles to give. Metal screamed as its ancient seal gave way. A rush of frozen air burst upward, carrying that same impossible smell machine oil, heavy grease old iron. Ranger backed up, not in fear, but in readiness, as if bracing for whatever might emerge. Ethan searched the floor for more mechanisms and found a recessed lever beside the valve. A long steel bar locked upright, as if waiting for someone bold or foolish enough to pull it. Ethan hesitated only a breath. Then he gripped it and yanked downward. The workshop answered him like a waking beast. A deep internal groan built beneath the concrete, rolling through the floorboards and up Ethan's legs. Ranger barked once, sharp alert. Then the slab, an entire 10 by 10 foot section of floor, shuddered and began to slide sideways with an agonizing grind of steel on steel. Snowlight spilled into the widening void, revealing a circular opening and a steel spiral staircase, spiraling into absolute blackness. Ethan stared, spellbound fear prickling up his spine. Ranger stepped forward, first paws clicking lightly on the top step, glancing back with a calm that Ethan envied. "You're out of your mind," Ethan breathed, but he followed. The staircase groaned under their weight. Ethan's flashlight beam cut through the suffocating darkness, carving a narrow corridor of visibility as they descended. His breath echoed in his ears. Ranger's claws tapping on metal treads were the only other sound, steady and unwavering. After what felt like 50 steps, 60, maybe more, the stairs ended abruptly. Ethan stepped off the final tread and into a space so vast the darkness swallowed his light before it reached a wall. The air down here was bitterly cold, but dry, not musty. Preserved. Waiting. Ranger padded forward, nose-lifted tail, low, moving with reverence rather than fear. Ethan followed him, heart pounding like a drum in his throat. When his boot nudged something solid beneath a tarp, he paused. Slowly, he pulled the heavy canvas aside. His breath froze in his chest. A steel giant stared back at him, a perfectly preserved M4 Sherman tank, its olive paint dulled but intact, its gun barrel angled sternly into the shadows. He staggered backward, pointing his flashlight further. Under another tarp, the angular menace of a German Panzer IV, its dark metal plates scarred but whole. Beside it, the compact shape of an M8 Greyhound armored car tires deflated, but body untouched by time. Ethan turned in a full circle, his light trembling as it revealed more crates stacked to the ceiling labeled with stenciled military markings. Tracklinks, engine blocks, barrel replacements. Ranger placed a paw gently on a frozen tank track, as if sensing the weight of the memories embedded in that steel. Ethan's breath came shallow. These weren't just machines. They were relics, grave markers, entire battlefields preserved underground. On a small workbench near the Sherman, Ethan found a leather-bound journal coated in dust. Its pages crackled as he opened it. The handwriting was tight, disciplined. Major Dominic Hartman. The first line read, "If you found this, then the world has forgotten these iron beasts. But I have not, and neither must you." Ethan stood frozen in the cold glow of his flashlight, the echoes of Hartman's words widening the space inside him that had long been hollow. He looked at Ranger, who gazed back quietly, waiting for his next move. Ethan whispered into the dark vault, "What did you leave for me to carry, old man?" And the silence answered with nothing but the breath of cold steel. Outside, the Montana winter roared like a starving beast, hurling sheets of snow against the metal workshop until the walls shivered. Inside, Ethan Cole sat at the edge of his cot, staring into the dark, like a man caught between two worlds, the one above ground, where he barely survived, and the one beneath the workshop, where steel monsters slept in silence. The weight of Major Hartman's journal still lingered in Ethan's hands. even though it lay closed on the workbench now. The words haunted him, whispering responsibility into the quiet. "If you found this, you must protect them." Protect. Ethan barely managed to protect himself. The ghosts of the past still stalked his nights, ambushing him with sounds, faces, and memories he had never asked to carry. How could he protect a vault full of tanks when he couldn't even protect his own mind? Ranger shifted beside him, letting out a low, tired exhale. The old German shepherd had been quieter today, moving slower, limping more heavily than usual. Ethan noticed but dismissed it as the cold, until it happened. Ranger stood, but his hind legs buckled. The dog collapsed onto the concrete with a sharp cry that sliced straight through Ethan's chest. Ranger Ethan dropped to his knees. Ranger tried again, claws scraping the floor, but his hips trembled violently beneath him. His breath came shallow and fast, his ears pinned back, not in fear, but in the desperate instinct to stay strong for his person. Ethan's hands shook as he lifted Ranger into his arms. The dog was heavy, solid muscle, softened by old age, yet Ethan hoisted him with the strength born only from panic. Snow hammered Ethan's face as he carried Ranger to the truck, his boots slipping on the ice. He whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I've got you, though." He didn't believe his own words. 20 minutes later, he pushed through the doors of White Pine Valley Veterinary Clinic, a small, warmly lit building wedged between a hardware store and a diner. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and pine cleaner washed over him. A woman stepped out from the back room, Dr. Lauren Hayes, the town's veterinarian. She was in her early 30s, of average height but athletic build, with dark brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her skin was fair, with a faint flush from working in the cold rooms of her clinic, and her hazel eyes were sharp, steady, and compassionate eyes of someone who had seen a lot of hurt and still chose to help anyway. Her manner was practiced calm, the kind of gentleness that came not from softness but from strength. "Let me see him," she said immediately, guiding Ethan toward an examination table. Ranger whimpered when she adjusted his back legs. Lauren's brow furrowed with the kind of frown that came only when a person already knew the diagnosis before they spoke it. Severe hip dysplasia, she confirmed. Cold weather can make it flare violently. He's in a lot of pain. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the ground tilt beneath him. Ranger lay still, eyes half closed, panting in tense little bursts. "What do we do?" Ethan asked, though part of him already sensed the answer would hurt worse than the diagnosis. Lauren exhaled. "He needs surgery, a complete hip replacement, preferably soon, and strong anti-inflammatories until then." "How much?" She hesitated, then said softly, $3,400. The clinic lights seemed to dim. Ethan felt the number hit him like a physical blow. He had less than $200 to his name. The rest of his savings, not that there was ever much, had gone to buying the workshop. His chest tightened painfully. "I can't." He couldn't finish. Lauren read the defeat in his face and softened her voice. "I can give him a steroid shot for now. It'll ease the pain for a day or two. But it's temporary, Ethan." He nodded numbly. Ranger didn't deserve pain, not after everything he had done for Ethan. Not after all the nights he had dragged Ethan out of nightmares by placing his head on his chest, grounding him back into reality. Lauren administered the injection, speaking gently to Ranger, who relaxed as the pain began to melt away. Ethan whispered, "Thank you," though the words felt small. He carried Ranger back to the truck. The dog already looked a little calmer, eyes less clouded by agony, but the relief tore Ethan apart even more, because he knew it was borrowed time. Back at the workshop, Ethan paced the floor like a trapped animal. Every tank in the vault below was worth a fortune. Any piece of it, a logbook, a component, even a relic, could save Ranger. He hated the idea, hated himself for considering it, but desperation did not care about pride. He descended into the armored vault. His footsteps echoed off steel hulls as he approached a shelf of preserved relics. One book sat alone, a field journal belonging to Captain Irving Doyle, a famous tank commander whose record made collectors drool. Ethan stared at it, battling the worst parts of himself. Selling this would betray Hartman's final plea, but not selling it would betray Ranger. His hands shook violently as he took the journal and slipped it beneath his jacket. When he climbed the staircase, his breath was ragged. Shame already burned in his stomach. He stepped back into the workshop and froze. Ranger, groggy but awake from the injection, struggled toward him. The dog dragged his weakened hind legs but refused to stop until he reached Ethan. Then, with infinite slowness, Ranger pressed his head against Ethan's trembling hand and licked his fingers, soft, warm, trusting. It shattered Ethan completely. The field journal dropped from his grasp. "I can't do it," he whispered, voice cracking. "I won't buy your life with a theft." He returned to the vault, put the journal exactly where it belonged, and sealed the hatch again. Back upstairs, Ethan looked at Ranger and made the only choice he had left. "I'll sell the truck," he said. "You're family, and family gets saved first." Ranger leaned into him, and Ethan held on like a drowning man grasping a lifeline. The winter morning broke cold and white over Hollow Ridge, casting long shadows across the frozen streets as the town stirred with its usual slow, weary rhythm. But everywhere Ethan Cole walked, he felt eyes on him, shifting glances from behind frosted shop windows, murmurs cut short the moment he passed. The story that had begun as a whisper had now grown into something larger, the veteran who sold his only truck just to save his old dog. Ethan, wrapped in his worn brown leather jacket and a flannel shirt that had seen too many winters, felt exposed in a way he wasn't used to. Vulnerability was something he avoided, yet now it followed him like a long shadow. Ranger, still stiff from the pain, but steadier on his paws thanks to the steroid shot, walked beside him with a slow but determined gait. Every few steps, the dog looked up at Ethan with quiet reassurance, as though reminding him that sacrifice was not weakness. Ethan was adjusting Ranger's blanket near the workshop door when he noticed a woman approaching across the snow-covered lot. She moved with purposeful steps, hugging a thick wool coat tightly around her body. Her name was Martha Coleman, the town's history teacher. She was in her 50s, tall and slender, with a posture shaped by decades of standing in front of chalkboards. Her wavy gray-streaked auburn hair was pinned into a careful twist, and her thin-rimmed glasses rested low on a sharp, observant nose. She had a face built for seriousness, high cheekbones, an angular jaw, and thoughtful hazel eyes that carried more curiosity than judgment. "Mr. Cole," she called gently. Ethan stiffened slightly, not hostile, just cautious. Years of training and trauma had conditioned him to brace for the worst when someone used his full name. "Yeah," he answered. Martha stopped a few feet away, glancing at Ranger with a soft smile, before turning her attention back to Ethan. "I heard about what you did for your dog," she said. "And I heard rumors about something else, something beneath your workshop." Ethan's breath caught. Not fear, just exhaustion. He'd barely slept since returning Hartman's journal. The burden of knowing the vault existed sat heavy in his mind, an obligation he never asked for. Rumors, Ethan said, careful. Martha nodded. Major Hartman was my uncle's commanding officer. He had a reputation not just as a soldier, but as someone obsessed with preserving military history. When you bought this place, I started wondering. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Cole, did you find something down there?" Ethan could have lied. It would have been easier, but Martha's gaze was steady earnest, and a lifetime of teaching had given her an intuition that cut through falsehood like glass. So Ethan exhaled and nodded once. Yes, he said quietly. A bunker. No, more than that. Tanks, dozens, preserved. Martha inhaled sharply, not with excitement, but reverence, like someone hearing a long-lost truth confirmed. You need to tell the town council, she urged. They're planning to seize the workshop over unpaid taxes. Ethan felt a cold weight drop through his stomach. I don't have anything left to give them. I sold my truck. I know, she said softly. Which is why you need to tell them the truth. If Hartman preserved those machines, then they belong to history, and history deserves a voice. Ethan wasn't sure if he had that voice, but he nodded anyway. The next evening, the council meeting hall buzzed with people. Ethan stood alone near the entrance, ranger at his side, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering with a faint electric hum. Every seat was packed, curious locals, skeptical council members, a few smirking men who clearly didn't believe Ethan had anything worth listening to. The meeting began with dry municipal announcements. Then Mayor Richard Colton, heavyset late 50s, with thinning blonde hair and a sharp, pragmatic tone, cleared his throat. Next agenda item: pending acquisition of abandoned properties for tax recovery, including the coal workshop. Ethan stepped forward. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Mr. Cole, you wish to speak? Colton asked flatly. Ethan swallowed hard, pushing down the memories clawing up the back of his throat. Sand heat rotor blades, the chaotic pulse of a battlefield that never left him. There's a bunker under the workshop, he began. A few snorts of laughter erupted immediately. Of course there is, someone muttered. Ethan clenched the podium until his knuckles turned white. Ranger sensed the shift in his breathing and pressed gently against Ethan's leg. That grounding touch held Ethan steady. I'm not lying, he continued. Major Hartman built it. He filled it with tanks, preserved them. More laughter. A few jeers. And for a moment, Ethan nearly crumbled under the weight of humiliation until a cane tapped sharply against the floor. The crowd fell silent as Walter Briggs, a 90-year-old veteran with a wiry frame and paper-thin skin stretched over bone, slowly stood. His white eyebrows hung low over sharp blue eyes that had watched wars rise and fade. His voice trembled with age, but carried resonance. Let me see the dog tag, he said. Ethan reached into his pocket and handed over the tarnished tag he had found in the vault. Walter lifted it toward the ceiling lights, his hands trembling. Recognition washed over him. Major Hartman Walter whispered. I served with him in the reserves. He told me once he wanted to save the steel beasts from being melted down. Walter turned to face the room. If Ethan Cole says there are tanks under that workshop, then I believe him. A stunned quiet fell like fresh snow, and the next morning that quiet became action. Ethan awoke to the rumble of engines outside. When he stepped out, bundled townsfolk stood waiting with shovels, excavators cutting torches, and determination carved into their breath-frosted faces. They dug. They cut. And by sunset, they uncovered a steel plate the size of a house roof, Hartman's buried entrance. Chains clinked, the crane roared, the plate lifted, and beneath it the light fell into a chamber of sleeping giants, Sherman hulls, panzer armor, armored carriers wrapped in shadow like a steel army dreaming through time. The entire town held its breath. Winter sunlight spilled across Hollow Ridge like cold silver glinting off fresh snow, and the rows of vehicles parked outside Ethan Cole's workshop. For the first time since he arrived in this forgotten Montana town, the air felt different, thicker, warmer somehow, as if the people themselves had changed the weather through sheer will. In the past 2 months, Hollow Ridge had transformed from a dying speck on the map into a hive of unified purpose. Every day Ethan woke to the sounds of welders, sparking engines, coughing back to life, and voices, so many voices working together beneath the heavy winter sky. The underground vault no longer felt like a tomb. It pulsed with movement, with life. And though Ethan had never said it aloud, he knew the change began the night he chose to save Ranger rather than take an easy fortune. That choice had cracked something open, not just in him, but in the entire town. Ethan descended the newly reinforced staircase, Ranger limping down a step behind him. The German shepherd, now recovering from surgery, walked with a gentler weight on his hind legs. His fur had grown softer again, and his alert amber eyes tracked every movement below with the calm confidence of an old soldier back on his feet. In the cavernous vault, warm work lights cast golden circles across steel hulls. Mechanics moved between the vehicles like ants tending a vast iron colony. Ethan paused at the sight of one of them, Greg Sanders, a barrel-chested man in his early 40s, bald with a thick black beard and arms covered in soot and faded navy tattoos. Greg had been known around town as gruff and impatient, someone whose bluntness often hid lingering grief from losing his younger brother in Afghanistan 10 years earlier. But here in the vault, Greg looked different, focused, proud, almost gentle. Morning coal, Greg called, without looking up, tightening a bolt on the Sherman's refurbished suspension. "She'll run again, you know. Might not win any races, but she'll move." Ethan smiled. "You're working miracles down here." Greg snorted. "Miracles are above my pay grade. Steel just needs respect." Across the vault, Martha Coleman pinned a new informational plaque beside the Panzer IV. Her hair was tied up in a neat bun, her glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose as she examined her handwritten notes. She had thrown herself into documenting Hartmann's legacy, researching every plate number, every engine, every historical anomaly. She moved like someone who had found her life's purpose in the most unexpected place. Ethan watched her for a moment, admiring her quiet dedication, before Ranger nudged his hand impatiently. The dog wanted to explore. They stepped through aisles of tanks, each one now cleared of dust and covered with canvas trimmed neatly at the corners. The Greyhound armored car had even been wired with soft amber LEDs, giving it the warm glow of a sleeping animal. Farmers had brought crates of food and hot stew for workers every evening. Welders and machinists had constructed a new lift system capable of raising even the heavier tank hulls. Teenagers eager to help swept the floors and cleaned decades of grime off rusted gearboxes. Hollow Ridge had found a purpose, and in doing so, it had found hope. By late afternoon, the town gathered at the entrance of what was now officially named the Winter Armored Museum. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Ethan, dressed in his cleanest flannel and jacket, stood before the sleeping steel army, with his hands clasped behind his back. Ranger sat proudly at his heel tail, sweeping slow arcs across the concrete. Mayor Fulton stepped forward. He was a tall man in his 60s, with a square jaw and a full head of white hair combed neatly back. Usually stern today, he held a softer expression, something bordering on reverence. Hollow Ridge was fading. Fulton began, his voice echoing deeply in the vault. But Ethan Cole reminded us that history doesn't live in books alone. It lives in the hands of those willing to protect it. He turned slightly toward Ethan. "You didn't just return history to this town. You returned something we thought we'd lost." His eyes lifted, scanning the faces of every man, woman, and child in the room. "You returned our faith." Then stepped forward. Tom Reynolds, the material store owner, a man with a thick, sandy beard, broad shoulders, and a booming laugh that often masked a fragile, sentimental core. He carried something in his palm, a single brass key on a frayed leather ring. Ethan blinked, breath-catching. Tom pressed the key into Ethan's hand. "We pooled together. Tom said gruffly. "Bought back your truck. Didn't feel right leaving you on foot." The weight of the key felt heavier than any tank in the vault. Ethan's throat tightened, a raw ache rising in his chest. Ranger leaned into him, resting his healed head against Ethan's leg, sensing the swell of emotion. Ethan choked out, I don't know what to say." But Tom shook his head. "You've already said it. Every day you came here, every sacrifice you made, this is just our turn." That evening, after the cheers faded and the crowd drifted home beneath the pale winter stars, Ethan sat alone outside the workshop. The sky glittered above him like a field of cold embers. Ranger lay against his side, warm and steady. Below them, the steel giants slept, and in front of them, illuminated by moonlight, sat the old Chevy truck, restored not by tools, but by kindness. Ethan exhaled softly. "We did the right thing, Ranger," he murmured. "And now, we finally have a home." Ranger's tail thumped once in quiet agreement. Some stories remind us that miracles do not always arrive with trumpets or thunder. Sometimes they come quietly wrapped in rusted steel, an old dog's loyalty, or the kindness of strangers who choose to believe again. Ethan Cole thought he had lost everything, yet God found a way to return to him, not wealth, but purpose, not comfort, but a community, and not a miracle of gold, but a miracle of people and love. And maybe that is how the Lord works most often, not by moving mountains, but by moving hearts. Not by giving us what we want, but by guiding us toward what we truly need. So if this story touched you even just a little, share it with someone who may need a reminder that hope still lives in quiet places. Leave a comment so we know you're walking this journey with us, and subscribe to join us in more stories, where light finds its way into the dark. May God bless you, protect your home, guide your steps, and may He send you your own small miracles, whether in the form of a loyal friend, a kind stranger, or a moment of peace you didn't know you were praying for. Amen.